guys, has just dropped, and Scott has done it again. He has surprised us all with a fantastic Five Nights at Freddy's thing, and he's been working on it for 10 months. 10 months of work into this beautiful, beautiful book. Are we going to get to know the secrets? Are we going to get to know more story and lore? Who knows? But Scott, the legend that he is, has very graciously allowed me to read chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4 here on the channel. Not only has he come through with this, but he actually gave me an early copy to prepare and get ready for the launch of the book. So Scott, if you're watching this, I love you, man. Not only are you the kindest person like I've ever encountered myself, you give money to charity, you're amazing, you do great games and stuff, but you're so supportive of me and my channel, and it just means so much to me. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Oh, here we are. Are we going to get to know the secrets? Are we going to get to know the lore? Who knows, guys? If you're hyped for this, then please hit that like button. It really, really is amazing. And the Silver Eyes, the Five Nights at Freddy's novel, is before my very eyes. Let's do it. Let's read it with my beautiful hazel eyes. Okay, I've got my glasses on so I can read it properly as well. Excellent. Chapter 1, ladies and gentlemen. Get those butts prepared. He sees me. Charlie dropped to her hands and knees. She was wedged behind a row of arcade games, cramped in the crawl space between the consoles and the wall, tangled electrical cords and useless plugs strewn beneath her. She was cornered. The only way out was past the thing, and she wasn't fast enough to make it. She could see him stalking back and forth, catching flickers of movement as he passed before the gaps between the games. There was scarcely enough room to move. But she tried to crawl backward. Her foot caught on a cord and stopped, contorting herself to carefully dislodge it. She heard a clash of metal on metal, and the farthest console rocked back against the wall. He hit it again, shattering the display and then attacked the next, crashing against them almost rhythmically, tearing through the machinery, coming closer. I have to get out. I have to. The panicked thought was of no help. There was no way out. Her arm ached and she wanted to sob aloud. Blood was soaking through the tattered bandage, and it seemed as though she could feel it draining out of her. A console a few feet away crashed against the wall, and Charlie flinched. He was getting closer. She could hear the grinding of gears and the clicking of servos even louder. Eyes closed, she could still see the way he looked at her. See the matted fur and the exposed metal beneath the synthetic flesh. Suddenly, the console in front of her was wrenched away and toppled over, thrown down like a toy. The power cords beneath her and her knees were yanked away, and Charlie slipped and stumbled, almost falling. She caught herself and looked up, just in time to see the downward swing of a hook. Ooh, I wonder who that could be. Welcome to Hurricane, Utah. Charlie smiled wryly at the sign and kept driving. Oh man, so we changed scenario already. Okay, so Foxy has been up to some stuff here. Foxy has trapped Charlie and we've moved on to somewhere else. Okay, welcome to Hurricane, Utah. Charlie smiled wryly at the sign and kept driving. The world didn't look any different from one side of the sign to the other, but she felt a nervous anticipation as she passed it. She didn't recognize anything. She had not really expected to, not this far at the edge of town where it was all highway and empty space. She wondered what the others looked like, who they were now. 10 years ago, they were best friends, and then it had happened, and everything ended, at least for Charlie. Okay, so 10 years, we're 10 years later after the event that we just saw. She hadn't seen any of them since she was 7 years old. They had written all the time as kids, especially Marla, who wrote like she talked, fast and incoherent. But as they grew older, they had grown apart. The letters had grown fewer and further between, and the conversations leading up to this trip had been perfunctory and full of awkward pauses. Charlie repeated their names as though to reassure herself that she still remembered them. Marla, Jessica, Lamar, Carlton, John, and Michael. That was the reason for the trip after all. Michael. It was 10 years since he died, 10 years since it happened, and now his parents wanted them all together for a dedication ceremony. All his old friends there when they announced the scholarship they were creating in his name. Okay, 10 years later, they were presumably about 17 now, and Michael has died. Okay, that's interesting. Michael is the only name here we remember, Mike Schmidt, but hey, let's see where it goes. Charlie knew it was a good thing to do, but the gathering still felt slightly macabre. She shivered and turned down the air conditioning, even though she knew it was not the cold. As she drove into the centre of town, Charlie began to recognise a few things. A few stores, a movie theatre, which was now advertising the summer's blockbuster hit. She felt a brief moment of surprise and then smiled at herself. What did you expect? That the whole place would be unchanged? A monument to the moment of your departure, frozen forever in July 1985? Well, that was exactly what she had expected. So 1985, so I take it we're in 1995 now. Okay, well, that was exactly what she had expected. She looked at her watch. Still a few hours to kill before they all met up. She thought about going to the movie, but she knew what she really wanted to do. Charlie made a left turn and headed out of town. 10 minutes later, she pulled to a stop and got out. The house loomed up before her. Its dark outline wound in the bright sky. Charlie leaned back against her car, slightly dizzy. She took a moment to steady herself, breathing deeply. She had known it would be here. An illicit look through her aunt's bank books a few years before told her that the mortgage was paid off, and Aunt Jen was still paying property taxes. It had only been 10 years, there was no reason it should have changed at all. Charlie climbed the steps slowly, taking in the peeling paint. The third stair still had a loose board, and the rose bushes had taken over one side of the porch, their thorns biting hungrily into the wood. The door was locked, but Charlie still had her key. She had never actually used it. As she slid it into the lock, she remembered her father putting its chains around her neck. In case you ever need it, well, she needed it now. The door opened easily, and Charlie looked around. She didn't remember much about the first couple of years here. She'd only been 3 years old, and the memories faded together into the blur of a child's grief and loss, not understanding why her mother had to go away, clinging to her father every moment, not trusting the world around her unless he was there, unless she was holding him tightly to her, burying herself in his flannel shirts and the smell of grease and hot metal in him. The stairs stretched straight up in front of her, but she did not move directly to them, going instead into the living room, where the furniture was still in place. She had not really noticed it as a child, but the house was a little too large for the furniture they had, and so things were spread out too widely in order to fill the space. The coffee table was too far from the couch to reach, the easy chair too far across the room to carry on a conversation. There was a dark stain in the wooden floorboards near the centre of the room, and Charlie stepped around it quickly and went into the kitchen, where the cupboards held only a few pots and pans, a few dishes. Charlie had never felt a lack of anything as a child, but it seemed now that the unnecessary enormity of the house was a sort of apology, the attempt of a man who had lost so much to give his daughter what he could. He had a way of overdoing whatever he did. The last time she was here, the house was dark and everything felt wrong. She was being carried up the stairs to her bedroom, although she was only 7 years old and could have gone quicker on her own 2 feet. But Aunt Jen picked her up as they stopped on the front porch and carried her, shielding her face as though she were a baby in the glaring sun. In her room, Aunt Jen set her down, closed the bedroom door behind them, and told her to pack her suitcase. And Charlie cried because all her things could never fit into that small case. "We can come back for the rest later," Aunt Jen said, her impatience leaking through as Charlie hovered indecisively at her dresser, trying to decide which t-shirts to bring along. They had never come back for the rest. Charlie mounted the stairs, heading to her old bedroom. The door was open, and she opened it. She had a giddy feeling of displacement, as though her younger self might be sitting there among her toys. Look up and asked Charlie, "Who are you?" Charlie went in. Like the rest of her house, her bedroom was untouched. The walls were pale pink, and the ceiling, which sloped dramatically on one side, following the line of the roof, was painted to match. Her old bed still stood against the wall beneath a large window, the mattress still intact, though the sheets were gone. The window was cracked slightly open, and the rotting lace curtains wavered in the gentle breeze from outside. There was dark water stain in the paint beneath the window, spreading to the mattress where the weather had gotten in over the years, betraying the house's neglect. Charlie climbed onto the bed and forced the window shut. With a screech, it obeyed, and Charlie stepped back and turned her attention to the rest of the room, to her father's creations. Their first night in the house, Charlie was afraid to sleep alone. She did not remember the night, but her father had told her about it often enough that the story had taken on the quality of a memory. She sat up and wailed until her father came to find her, until he scooped her up and held her, and promised her that he would make sure she was never alone again. The next morning, he took her by the hand and led her to the garage, where he sat to work, keeping that promise. The first of his inventions was a purple rabbit, now grey with age from years of sitting in the sunlight. Her father had named him Theodore. He was the size of a 3-year-old child, her size at the time, and he had a plush fur, shining eyes, and a dapper red bow tie. Okay, Theodore, I love that. Okay, he didn't do much, only waved a hand, tilted his head to the side, and said in her father's voice, "I love you, Charlie." But it was enough to give her a night watcher, somebody to keep her company when she could not sleep. Right now, Theodore sat in a white wicker chair in the far corner of the room. Charlie waved at him, but not activated. He did not wave back. After Theodore, the toys grew more complicated. Some worked and some did not. Some seemed to have permanent glitches, and others simply did not appear to Charlie's childish imagination. She knew her father took those back to his workshop and recycled them for parts, though she did not like to watch them dismantled. But the ones that were kept, those she loved, they were here now, looking at her expectantly. Smiling, Charlie pushed a button beside her bed. It gave way stiffly, but nothing happened. She pushed it again, holding it down longer, and this time, across the room, with a weary creak of metal on metal, the unicorn began to move. The unicorn, who Charlie named Stanley for some reason she could no longer remember, was made of metal and had a painted glossy white, and it trundled around the room in a circular track, bobbing its head stiffly up and down. The track squealed now as it rounded the corner and came to a stop beside Charlie, where Charlie sat on the bed. She got down and knelt beside him on the floor, patting his flank. His glossy paint was chipped and peeling, his face had given over to the rust, so that his eyes gazed lively out of decay. "You need a new coat of paint, Stanley," Charlie said aloud. The unicorn gazed ahead, unresponsive. At the foot of the bed there was a wheel, made of patched-together metal. It had always reminded her of something she might find on a submarine. Charlie turned it. It stuck for a moment, then gave way, rotating as it always did. Across the room, the smallest closet door swung open, and out sailed Ella on her track, a child-sized doll bearing a teacup and a saucer in her tiny hands like an offering. Ella's plaid dress was crisp, and her patent leather shoes still had shone. Perhaps in the closet she had been protected from the damage of damp. Charlie had an identical outfit back when she and Ella were the same height. "Hi, Ella," she said softly. As the wheel unwound, Ella retreated to the closet again, the door closing behind her. Charlie followed her out to the closet wall. The closets had been built to align with the slant of the roof, and there was 3 of them. Ella lived in the short one, which was about 3.5 feet tall. Next to it was one a foot or so higher, and a third closet to the bedroom door, closer to the bedroom door, which was the same height as the rest of the room. She smiled, remembering. "Why do you have 3 closets?" John had demanded the first time she came over. She looked at him blankly, confused by the question. "Because that's how many there are," she said finally. Then, defensive, she pointed to the littlest one. "That one's Ella's anyway," she added. John nodded, satisfied. Charlie shook her head and opened the door to the middle of the closet, or tried to. The knob stopped with a jolt. It was locked. She rattled it a few times, but gave up without much conviction. She stayed crouched low to the floor and glanced up to the tallest closet, her big girl closet that she would someday grow into. "You won't need that until you're bigger," her father would say, but that day never came. It now hung slightly open, but Charlie didn't disturb it. It hadn't opened for her. It had only given way to time. She stood. She noticed something shiny, half hidden under the rim of the locked middle door. She leaned forward to pick it up. It looked like a broken-off piece of a circuit board. She smiled slightly. Nuts and bolts and scraps and parts had turned up all over the place once upon a time. Her father had always had stray parts in his pockets. He would carry something he was working on around, set it down and forget where it was, or worse, put something aside for safekeeping and never to be seen again. There was also a strand of hair clinging to it. She unwound it carefully from the tiny lip of metal it was stuck on. Finally, as though she had been putting it off, Charlie crossed the room and picked up Theodore. His back had not faded in the sun like the front of his body, and it was the same rich, dark purple she remembered. She pressed the button at the base of his neck, but he remained lifeless. His fur was threadbare, one ear hanging loosely by a single rotting thread, and through the hole she could see a green plastic of his circuit board. Charlie held her breath, listening fearfully for something. "Ai-o-lai," the rabbit said with a barely audible halting noise, and Charlie set him down, her face hot and her chest pinched tight. She had not really expected to hear her father's voice again. "I love you too." Charlie looked around the room again. As a child, it had been her own magical world, and she was possessive of it. Only a few chosen friends had ever been allowed inside. She went to her bed and set Stanley moving on his track again. She left, closing the door behind her before the little unicorn came